It's Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs. Let's start the show with Lewis Tennant. Here we go. Guests and interviews that you're looking for with creators, innovators, and so much more. For all episodes and further info, verbalhighs.com is the place to go.
All right, welcome to Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs, a podcast podcasted from a dining room table in Tamaki Makaurau, that's Auckland, in Aotearoa, that's New Zealand. My name is Lewis and I'm the host of the show. This week's guest, Danny McCrum, we'll call him a self-made musician and entrepreneur from these fine shores, born in this city. I'll chat a little bit more about him later before handing over to the conversation. But first, to the items on the agenda. If you are a skipper of intros, which I'm guilty of on some shows, even the ones I love dearly, give it about 4 to begin with. That takes you about 2 minutes, doesn't it? And then maybe another couple, and then another couple, and then another couple. If you're new, there's a sting that gives you an indication that we're into the content. This is content too. It's all content, I'm content to say. And then also the second voice of the guest will give you a clue as well. I've already wasted nearly a minute there. We haven't even done anything on the agenda because the intro isn't part of the agenda because it's just something that happens every week. First on the agenda is Kane Charter. A friend has a lineage going back to kind of the Dunedin scene and sound, and he used to flat with a reasonably famous and legendary, that's the wrong word, well-regarded New Zealand musician whose name is a spoonerism of a name I mentioned earlier, and I clicked that I was going to go to Gary's gig at the Point Chev Cupid Bar, and then I got a wee message delightfully through a little bit later saying, hey, would you like to DJ at the gig? And I said yes, and then he did a thumbs up, a blue thumbs up, a good stock Facebook response there, and then the next message from him was one last Q, which stands for question, what's your DJ name? Which I took immediately to mean DJ name, and I said, oh boy, I feel like making something up. I'm so off-brand these days. Off-brand was in quotes. And he said, whatevs. And then I said, Kane Charter. And then I said, I'll get my coat. Lewis Tennant, or Lieutenant, is fine. And then I got back Kane Charter, and then in capitals, idea, and then in small letters, you. Kane Charter, full stop, I dare you. And I said, just said it because I knew you are mates. I know you are mates, sorry. And I know they used to flat together if I didn't mention that. And then I got a little bit weirded out. It's funny, you know, it is a funny name. It is. Kane Charter is, I think anyone Charter is in the humorous category. Kane with a K, which I thought was, arguably cleverer than with a C, but then I thought, I don't know Shane from Adam, and it's nothing to do with Shane, and he's an icon, that's the word I was looking for before, and if someone billed themselves as Tuus Lenant, which is not funny at all, but is obviously a spoonerism of my name, I would be weirded out by that person. I'll probably ever meet Shane, but it's just an odd place to be with someone, particularly an icon of New Zealand music. And so, ever the workhorse, ever the enjoyer of a play on words, I messaged back, what about Kanye Charter? That's possibly funnier and safer, is what I wrote. Then I wrote, then Kane, just in case in text he didn't see the very important swapping of the N and the Y to get Kanye Charter. And he replied, that is very good. And then I replied, I'm laughing out loud, which I do when I'm actually laughing out loud. I'm not really a huge LOL guy, though I have started to use it more, which is another story for another day. Stick with Lewis, I say. Up to you, Kanye Charter. So anyway, DJ Lieutenant is playing with Ocean Beach at Point Chev at the Cupid Bar on 9th of August. Shane has a book out. Apparently it's brilliant. While I'm on local things that are very good, on Simon Sweetman's podcast, I listened in its entirety, and I close listened to him and John Toogood, and I messaged Simon. I said, I think you handled that very well. Not handled it in the sense that anything sensitive or bizarre happened, but there's a lot of places to go with someone else as iconic a musician and New Zealand figure as John. And I thought John said some very prolific and very what's the word? We'll stick with prolific. Not prolific, that's not the right word. He said, I'll just go with something simple. He spat some wisdom, man, about the state of the world, right? About politics, about amazing, one of the best summations of Trump I've ever heard. Also spoke about obviously he's converted to Muslim and faith, and then that terrible event in Christchurch. It's just a very interesting episode on the what does that say? D-Guy, just looking at my notes, D-Guy DJ, Avalanche City. I think that was another... Oh, that's right. Okay, so we'll talk about this week's guest. It is Danny McCrum, and I was just going to say that the episode we talk about from their show, Don't Give Up Your Day Job, because Danny's a podcast host as well, is Avalanche City. Fascinating story about the music industry if you want to check that out. I am getting into rant territory now. We're over 6 minutes. Danny, thank you for coming in. He and his pal Bobby, who used to be an op shop, host a show, as I say, called Don't Give Up Your Day Job. It's got a very similar mandate to mine, but it's delivered in a different style. They're from a kind of different world, in a way, of creatives and so on than I am, which makes for fascinating guests. In terms of, I've listened to people on theirs I've now heard of and very much enjoyed them. And I'd like to think that we did a good job, him being a guest as he hosts as well. So it felt in the spirit of some of those overseas shows where they swap being guest and host with reckless abandon. Thank you to Hallertau. They sent some beers. Dave sent some beers after a wee while. All I had to do was ask, and I did. I had so much planned for this, but I think the Kane Charter story is enough. Now, there's a little pink piece of paper around. Oh, God. I hope I forgot that. I'm not going to stop this one. Basically, I'm on Google Podcasts now. I'm on iHeartRadio, which is a local platform of one of the big radio networks. Of course, still find us on Apple. I'm not sure what's happening with iTunes, but they're going to Apple Podcasts. Then on all those other usual podcast providers, those bots seem to find me and slip me in there. Ooh, and I'm on Spotify now because I applied and they said yes to this punk indie project that I supply free content to for the billionaire owner, just in his 30s, of Spotify. So between him and Apple, not sure where to send the invoice. Hope you enjoy this show. Jesus, it's been 8 minutes.
This is Dr. Tannen's Verbal Highs.
I've told I've got a good radio voice.
No, but mic technique's everything.
It is.
Well.
Absolutely.
I just realised...
Knowing to pull back when you go for a big laugh.
Yeah, you've got to pull back. I'll just realised I've forgotten my tea and your tea...
My bag plate.
Your bag plate.
Never leave home without one.
Right. So...
I like the record collection and the dominant role that the player has up there. It's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, this might be one of these properly live intros where I leave all of this in the new space.
Yep.
I used to DJ a lot.
Oh, yep.
And I had a setup there, not there, for years, mix of two turntables, but I kind of felt a bit grown up in this place to have a kind of sort of like, early 20s Starship Enterprise.
Really? So you feel
DJ setup in the...
You feel a new pressure.
It's the growing up. It's slightly elevated on the stand there, one record at a time. Sit back, consider the grooves.
That sounds concerning to me. It sounds like you're losing something rather than gaining,
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're gaining the place, which is cool. It's a nice place.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
But are you losing your youth?
Well, since I've been teaching, I've become painfully aware of my age. I sort of went from And I don't know, it just suddenly felt like 10 or 15 years was gained in a really positive way.
Right. Well, that's
How
good.
old are you?
I'm 24, obviously. No, I just turned 40.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
So
which
we're
is-
of a similar vintage.
Well, yeah, it's a very strange number to hit, isn't it? Because I don't know about you, but I certainly don't feel it.
Well,
I don't think I live a conventional 40-year-old's life, you know?
I think it's generational too. Like, it's probably
Yeah.
come up on your show with people, like the pressure. I don't even know if it's pressure, but the sort of desire or pressure or the societal norm to get old isn't like what it was in our grandparents
That's
or
right.
parents' generation.
Well, I don't know about you, but we don't see our parents in ourselves, you know? I don't know what your parents are like, but my parents were very normal, middle class, went to the office, had a job, you know, that kind of thing.
Well, they didn't skateboard with their kids like they see now.
Yeah.
They didn't collect vinyl toys.
I don't know if I ever saw my dad wear a T-shirt.
They didn't have. You're right. They didn't have 24 pairs of Nikes.
No. It's the little things.
Right, my guest today, tonight actually, this is a late recording. It's good. Is Danny McCrum? He has a podcast which we'll chat about in a second. That's why I'm quite excited tonight actually, because I like the idea of the cross pollination of shows.
Absolutely.
He's also a guitarist and singer, solo artist, session musician. He's released 3 albums, been a full-time musician for over 14 years now, and played support for numerous artists including Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, Joan Armatrading, Simple Minds, Brian Ferry, Tommy Emmanuel, haven't heard that name for a minute, John Mayer, and many more. The Australian guitar virtuoso.
Yeah.
He currently tours with a number of acts and runs a successful production company. Kia ora.
Hello. Nice to be here.
So how did you guys get into doing the show? Were you like me in that you were just listening suddenly to shitloads of podcasts and then were
Yeah.
like, hey, we can do this?
Pretty much, yeah. We both had become fans of podcasts on our own ways.
Yeah.
Bobby Kennedy, who I do the show with,
Yeah.
he had an idea to produce a documentary some years back.
Yeah.
And he couldn't quite get it together in the sense that he couldn't get support. He tried to sell it to a few different companies and things, but he just couldn't get it picked up.
About?
Well, he wanted to put a documentary together that really shone a light on the reality of the business, you know, because there's a lot of stuff out there which, of course, is
Oh, the music industry.
the music industry
Yeah.
and also just the creative industries in general.
Yeah.
He's also very passionate about film as well.
Yeah.
And I think we've all probably noticed how detached sometimes the information that goes to the public is versus the reality of what it's like to actually be in the business,
Yeah.
you know. So he had been thinking on these terms, and he thought, well, it'd be great to have a documentary that actually showed what it's really like to be a professional in the creative world.
So more than just something to entertain audiences, but almost like a AV handbook for the
Yeah.
budding creative.
Well, he had been a drummer in one of the most successful bands in New Zealand history,
That's Opshop,
in
folks.
Opshop, you
Yeah.
know, and he had all sorts of different experiences with people. Some people assumed that they were multimillionaires, and other people assumed that they were absolutely broke. You know, people have very weird views on what musicians' lives are like.
Or some people just have no perspective or don't even... It's not even that... It's just that they don't even consider what goes on when that person isn't on the stage.
That's right, yeah.
So-
And I don't blame them either,
Yeah.
because we actually deceive our audiences by constantly giving them the PR spin.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that's why he was thinking, well, wouldn't it be great to actually talk about what it's really like, because it's
Yeah.
actually more exciting in a way.
And so I'm guessing the long story short is that it was quite hard to get off the ground in comparison to a show like you guys have started podcast-wise.
Yeah, he couldn't get support for it. I think he said a lot of people were afraid to touch the subject,
Right.
Because it sounds kind of risky to some people.
Yeah.
We were touring together for quite a few years in a particular thing.
Yeah.
And as we were doing that, we kept having these conversations. He told me about it, and I said, well, maybe the easier way to do it is to do a podcast.
Yeah.
It's not as expensive.
Yeah.
And we don't have to get anyone to pick it up. We can do it ourselves. And also having a wide range of guests and a large number of guests, which
Yeah.
you couldn't fit that many guests into an hour and a half
No.
documentary. So we get actually more information. You know,
Yeah.
it's more useful.
And when did you start the show?
I think it was early 2016.
Our shows do have a lot of similarities. I
Yeah.
was late 2016, but just
Right.
like we're talking about off air, behind the scenes. We've got a similar amount of episodes and kind of a similar format. Like you guys do the sort of like catch up. With me, it's kind of a sort of existential rant, a mix of like, you know, the good times and paranoia.
Right.
And yours is obviously, because there's two of you, kind of banter, and then you go into the guest, right? So
That's
I'm
right.
guessing you record the guest and then do the chat to sort of, that's how I do it, to sort of the chats situates it in the time that I'm posting it.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I sometimes find getting those together harder than recording the actual episode.
Why is that? You're on your own, aren't you?
Yeah, it's just kind of what to say and
You
how
find
to
it hard
say
to book yourself in.
yeah. It's just weird. And sometimes I have like wee moments of like, well, not paranoia, but it's kind of like, why am I kind of throwing out the behind the scenes part of my life in these intros? And you know what it is? It's basically like on a good day, it's a homage to Mark Maron.
Yeah.
On a bad day, it's a rip-off. Were you listening to shows like that?
Yeah,
Get
absolutely.
that format?
Huge fan of Mark Maron.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What do you think of the Obama episode? Pretty special, right?
It was fantastic. I mean, they talked a lot about the shooting that had just happened, which of course was very important.
Right.
It was important that they talked about it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I wish that hadn't happened anyway, obviously, the shooting. But I also wish that the interview could have happened without that being the main theme, because it would have been.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great interview and it was really interesting.
Well, excuse me, as a fan, I'm assuming I really loved that, and it'll come back to what you were saying, funnily enough, about the behind the scenes of creativity and so on, of being in the public eye. I almost equally enjoyed that episode where him and Brendan, his producer, just talked about how it all came together. And I don't know if you recall, but Maron said, I wasn't actually going to bring up, I think it was Sandy Hook or something like that at the time. He was like, I wasn't actually going to bring that up. He did.
Yes.
Or something,
that's right.
something like that.
I remember that.
But to what we originally opened this topic on, it's funny because although the doco didn't go ahead, the whole shtick of the style of podcast we're discussing is kind of by its nature behind the scenes or open or not edited,
right,
or all the chatty bits around the main kind of what would normally be mediated and put on TV and radio. So you're sort of doing it by the nature of the style of what you're doing, right?
Well, I think that's right, and I think that's why it's so important, because it's one of the only places left in modern culture where you have absolutely honest, authentic conversation.
That's right.
And I mean, we had Dave Baxter on the show a year or two ago, and he was Avalanche City, and the whole court case thing had just happened, and the verdict had come out, and the whole
I listened to that. That was fascinating,
and it was interesting because that week, when it all came out got in the news and everything, he turned down interviews with some pretty major networks and accepted the podcast with us. And we asked him why, and he said, because I couldn't fit the story into 2 minutes. Yeah,
That's right. The soundbite culture is kind of dying by nature of it. And I actually was saying to a colleague at work the other day, I mean, you can't directly relate these things, but it's all many things influence how things change. But I look at I was just watching them before you came on over, how Hillary, Barry, and who I call Newsboy, Jeremy, interact on 7 Sharp now. I reckon things like podcasts have got to have an influence on that. There's this kind of irreverent, it's not really mediated media. Yeah. They're just kind of chatting and being themselves.
I think authenticity sells, even if it's not authentic. I think that's why we have a lot of things coming out being pitched as being organic or authentic or profound or whatever. Yeah. And whether it is or not is almost not the point. They've got to pitch it like that because that's popular right now. Yeah. Someone played me this YouTube clip the other day of this band. I can't remember who the band was, but it was like a number of young people standing in a row, all hitting things, and it was sort of an arty, unconventional thing. Yeah. And I said, "Isn't this amazing? Don't they sound amazing? Just standing there, just hitting things, and all singing and whatever." And I said, "Yeah, it really did sound amazing. It does sound amazing. Pity it's not real."
Why isn't it real?
Well, listen to how well the vocals are recorded.
I got you.
There's no mics.
Trying to look indie and lo-fi as hell.
But there were no mics in the shot. It was so well recorded. It was definitely done properly.
I knew this would happen. It's unsurprising for me. I've really grown, and your perspective changes if you talk to people. For 80 minutes about their life at a time.
But I think I've noticed my perspective changing on a number of things, and it's just basically growing. Also, the world's been through quite a few changes since we started the podcast. Funnily enough, for example, the Me Too movement has been a huge thing. Yeah. And did you listen to the recent Maron episode with what's her name?
This is like turning into a Maron
special.
Yeah. I had a listener go. He goes, "Mate, you've got to stop talking about Rogan." There was a period I went through for about 10 episodes. Anyway, so you look that up. The episode with, I tell you, so on the Me Too thing, it's unrelated, but it's related to gender. My issue with my show, and I've had a couple of people pointed out in what I feel is an unhealthy way, because I'm not actually bound to broadcasting rules, but at the same time I'm painfully aware, and I'm not that stoked with the fact I tend to have a lot of old white dudes on. I need more female guests, and to your guys' credit, you had a great mix of guests when I looked.
Yeah.
Is that big idea hookup you guys got? How did you get them involved supporting it? Do they help you get guests or?
No, they've suggested one or two. They've put a couple forward, but no, they don't seek guests out for us. That was a connection through Bobby, where I think he had a relationship with them through some other means, and we said, look, this really seems to fit what you guys are about, and, and they agreed. So
do they help? I mean, you don't have to get into specifics. I'm just interested in how different people are putting shows together. Do they sort of help you out financially, or do they help you out promoting it? Or
no, they help us out promoting it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great name to have behind you, because they are, again, this of
legitimizes
the ilk of what you're doing.
The name I was trying to remember is Eve Ensler. And she was
the book that she wrote about her father.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
she was severely abused, and it was it's an intense episode.
It isn't,
but it's I think it's very important. It's
it
worth
is
listening to.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say about the Me Too thing is that when that whole subject blew up, and we weren't really going into it to any great depth. I mean, I don't think either of us felt like we had a position, to talk from.
Yeah.
But we talked about it a little bit from time to time, and I just noticed over the years, over the months at least, that our comments would start to change a little bit as we were listening, because I think the first thing was a little bit defensive.
I'd agree, and I didn't mean to make, but I said the classic line you're not supposed to say, not all men, and then I had someone explain to me why that's not a great thing to say.
Kai probably said the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's literally true. Not all men are scumbags. Yeah. It is literally true, but it's an irrelevant point.
It is.
And what women have gone through needs to be talked about. And listening to that recent episode of Marin's was one more moment where it just blew my mind, and I thought, wow, I really don't know enough about this.
Well, also when you're producing so many hours of conversation, you do have other stuff in your life. You have, commitments. You have levels of energy. My point there is that Maron, like any other host, will go through phases of being particularly on point.
Yep.
And I thought that was a real return to the form of like why his show is so successful. I listened to that, because he handled it really well.
He did.
Yeah,
absolutely.
What have I listened to on yours? I listened to Peter Dickens because he used to be my boss. I listened to Stephen Gallagher because he's a good old friend.
Lovely
and I
guy.
think he listens to most of these. Hi, Steve! And I listened to Gene Rivers. I've listened to a few others. They're just the three that I plucked today from looking at one page. And I thought I'd mention Gene because it relates to the getting different people's perspective and so on. What I've appreciated listening to your guys' show is that you're from a different musical world to me, and it's sort of opened my perspective to there isn't just Lewis's perspective on something. There's guys who've come up through this band, he's come up through Op Shop while I was out of New Zealand, so kind of the early 2000s is sort of a blank spot in my New Zealand musical history.
Right.
And just hearing you guys talking to Gene and kind of learning about DJ culture was really interesting,
That's actually a good example of a learning moment for us.
Yeah.
I still have a few opinions on that. But yeah, Gene certainly
gave me... You still have a few opinions on that. What's that? Where does that go?
Well,
it's just
I just drop it in there and move on, I love the argument about whether DJs are musicians. I think it's a hilarious argument. I feel like it's like being an actor playing a doctor in a TV show and then saying you're a doctor.
Generals gathered in their masses, just like witches at black masses. Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction. Oh, Lord, yeah.
Some have good taste and just put records on. Some have bad taste and just put records on. But I think you learn about kind of composition and rhythm and
Sure.
what works well together. And a good DJ set has a high level of musicality and skill. So I don't know. Do we want to go down this rabbit hole? But
Well, no,
there is musicianship involved.
I don't know if it's very interesting to go down, but the only thing that I'd want to add is that I think what might fuel that argument is that some musicians are probably dismissive of DJs.
Yeah.
And so it's probably in some ways DJs saying, hey, we are actually good at something. We have a skill. And I totally agree with that.
And I tell you what's interesting now is, because I know I'm woefully behind technology-wise these days, but the production DJ thing is becoming really blurred anyway.
Yeah.
A lot of the controllers and stuff coming out, it's certainly not just, I shouldn't say just, it's not mixing two compositions together and creating a new one. It's actually doing a whole lot of other stuff on the fly. So I listened to an interesting podcast with Tom Larkin, where he was talking about, how he thinks and what he sees, because he's really involved at different levels of the industry, as you know.
Yep.
He predicts a sort of a new breed of musician that doesn't just play guitar or doesn't just DJ or doesn't just this, that. People are going to get really kind of, is ambidextrous the right word? Like multi-skilled on a number of instruments and forms.
I think that's already happening.
It's already happening, yeah, for sure.
And I was actually just about to sort of throw musicians under the bus a little bit by saying we're already sort of blurred in our skill set, because, as I'm sure you know, you can go to the studio these days with very little talent and make an album, thanks to technology.
Well, see, I'd say the talentless person that goes and makes an album is less a musician than the skilled DJ.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. So the lines are too blurred.
Shall we hug?
Yeah.
So back to the podcast. I wanted to ask you more stuff. Like, so what about? I just think that there's a real not dismissal. That's wrong. There's a real blank spot, I think, with a lot of New Zealanders at the moment about actual New Zealand shows that are out there.
Right.
Like, there's you guys, there's myself, there's Simon Sweetman doing that similar style show. Are there others? I'm looking for intel. Are there other shows like ours that you know about that you listen to locally?
There's the Drummers podcast,
right,
with Andrew Rooney.
Yeah,
that's a good one. But no, there is a shortage, I think.
What did the drummer get on his test?
What did he get?
Saliva. And that's a Tom Larkin joke. So that's one of the best drummers New Zealand's produced, folks. Stop with the hate mail.
As long as people didn't think I said it, that's fine.
So so he just talks to drummers, long form. Fascinating.
Oh no, I think it's mostly talking to drummers, but he does talk to a few other people as well. Yeah. I think he's starting to open up a bit wider. So,
but do you feel like there's not a real widespread awareness of New Zealand shows like there are of the overseas? I think
that's true.
Opportunity for us to
absolutely, yeah. I think I don't know if we're on the cutting edge, because podcasts obviously have been around for 20 years, but
we both just said we nicked someone else before,
pretty much, yeah. But I mean, that's happened, thousands of times before in all sorts of other fields.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole world is a sample in 2019.
But the question is, how do we connect with audiences? How do we get our podcast heard about?
Well,
that's a tough
one
thing
I notice, because you guys like me do it for love, and I've thought about it, like with what I do. Maybe if I was in London or LA or one of those places, the sort of level of people I'm talking to, and it's very purposeful that I'm not trying to get, big known New Zealand kind of media celebrities.
Right.
You probably could, make a living and get fairly respectable audience numbers doing that, but I'm under no illusion here, for the tyranny of population, that it's only ever going to get so many people. But what I have noticed is a sort of a plan that seems to work for people globally, is a sort of an informal network. And I had a look the other day, and there's one called Podcast New Zealand.
Right.
And all their shows are really blandly but cleverly named, in that they all have New Zealand in the title.
Right.
The New Zealand Mechanics Podcast.
Yeah.
The New Zealand, Electric Vehicle Podcast. So I think there's if you kind of create a posse or a collective or whatever you'd call it, that's one way to do it.
I know about those guys, and they sort of act like a record company.
Oh,
so
really?
You actually sign up to them, and you sign away a lot of your earnings and your rights.
But what earnings? There's no earnings.
I know, but it's still on paper.
So maybe. Right.
That's
so
why we spoke to them,
right.
but we decided not to go ahead.
Oh, that's interesting. So they're predicting a time. I mean, it's probably quite clever of them. A time when there will be that ability. Although in New Zealand, I just don't know population-wise that...
Well, regardless, I don't see the point in handing over part of your ownership. You know,
Yeah.
I feel the same way about music these days. I
Yeah.
mean, I feel that the relevance of record companies has significantly decreased.
Yeah,
you know?
I was going to talk to you a bit more about that later, actually.
Right.
But, look, as I say, I'm lucky through work. Now they want me to... Because I am a lecturer up the road at AUT.
Yep.
I've just been brought on full-time there, and they kind of want me to concentrate on looking at podcasts at work. So I'm in this brilliant situation where I'm secure, I'm earning okay money, and my work is complementing doing this.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, one lovely thing is I just put a donate button up because someone said to do it, and I've kind of had patrons every year. I had a guy in Brisbane who I don't know from Adam, who from memory put a couple $100, no, 100, whatever it was, in the first year.
You're joking.
So my
I should do that.
so my basically my Squarespace subscription has ended up roughly getting paid most years by
Wow.
$20 coming in here, you know, 50 there.
So you're
just
close-
2 or 3, 4 people a year. It's lovely.
You're close to breaking even then, are you?
Well, it's like the old, you know, before the entertainment industry was commercialized in the modern sense. You know, it ran on patrons, right?
Right, yeah, of
right.
course, yeah.
So we're returning to that to that old model in a lot of ways.
That's great.
Who do you guys host with in all of that? Like, I'm just interested in that end, and I think a lot of listeners will be interested in potentially podcasting or whatever. Like, just quickly, how's it all bunged together? Who hosts your audio and?
Oh, like with the aggregator?
Yeah, how did you just glue it all together technically?
Do you mean in regards to how do we get it up online?
Well, basically, I chose Squarespace,
Oh, yeah.
and that was a good decision for some reasons. It wasn't such a great decision for other reasons I discovered later. But
Yeah.
it is a great all-in-one package.
Right.
Like, how do you guys... Because you've got a good website like myself, and how does it all
We
come
built
together?
our website. Our website is with Squarespace.
Yeah.
We're actually in the process of switching it over.
Yeah.
So there'll be a new website up soon.
So you've had some issues too?
No,
Okay.
it's just about managing costs and things. We've found a better solution in our opinion, so
Yeah.
we're switching that over. Squarespace are a fantastic product, and
Ding!
yeah, no, nothing against them at all.
Yeah, no, they are.
And we use an online aggregator. We upload it, and it goes out to all the platforms. And
that's clever.
What
What is it?
It's called Buzzsprout.
Right. I
Yeah.
was going to ask what Buzzsprout was. That's on my list.
Right. Yeah.
So
there
that
you go.
fires it out to Spotify,
Yep.
and because I'm just
Oh,
looking...
not Spotify, but we are on Spotify now.
I just got on
Yeah.
Spotify now too,
Right.
and that's one you have to do manually.
Yes,
but for
that's
people
right.
who don't know, if you find one of our shows on a lot of the other ones, it's actually quite cool unless you're precious about your content. I've been quite surprised. Like today, I just looked at Google Podcasts. I'm already on there.
Right. Oh,
So I'm
interesting.
guessing you will be too, because it'll just be DriftNet phishing
Yeah.
RSS feeds, won't it?
I mean, I'm actually pretty useless at looking at things online to see where we are. I should probably do that. But just the other day, I looked around a little bit and found a couple of places like, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then I had this really... I was actually I think it was last weekend or the weekend before, I thought, I've really got to try and get us on Spotify.
Yeah.
So I went on and filled out the thing and tried to do it, and it failed. And it, like the form wouldn't even submit. And I was like, what's going on here? Tried it again and again and again.
Yeah.
And then I realised the reason why it wasn't working is because they already accepted it when we tried it 2 years
2
ago.
years ago.
Or something.
Right, well, I only found it... the way I read it was it's something that happened recently, because you know that guy... By the way... It's where all of this all these conversations finally come full circle, talking
Yeah.
about economics and that side of thing. And that it's like, I'll start this punk indie project. I was never going to be, because I'm broadcasting background, like, you know, student alternative radio. I'm never going. I feel like I'd make a fart joke no one would like if I worked at RNZ, and I feel like I'm too buttoned up for commercial radio.
Sure.
So I've been in this so it's like, yeah, this punk indie, yeah. And then what's the first thing you got to do? You got to give one of the biggest corporations in the world, Apple. Your content, you know,
Right,
So
yeah.
you can't even. I was trying to find the email where I send the invoice, and then it's the same thing. Like I read about how Spotify just pledged $500 million to invest in podcasting for their
Right.
platform.
Is that right?
They brought Gimlet, which is hugely significant. Gimlet
Right.
have made some smash hit shows in the States. So, you know, I put it up on Spotify the other day, because you got to, you know, it's the main,
yeah.
all my students, that's how they listen to stuff now.
Right.
But again, I'm like, the irony is not lost on me here.
Yeah.
That back in the day, if I gave someone something I made, I invoiced them.
But at least you still own it, and you can say what you want.
No,
you know,
I'm happy.
I mean, we
I'm
think
happy
it's
with
funny
everything.
we think it's funny being on Spotify because through all of our 70-something episodes, we've been highly critical of them.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Yeah,
So-
talking about streaming music, fucking musicians, kind of a
I
thing.
mean, there's no question about it, you know.
Yeah.
But then now we're on their platform. Although we're of course with podcasts, it's different because we're not trying to sell the podcast.
Yeah.
you know, it's up there free, so I don't mind that being on.
Well,
Spotify.
someone said something to me handy early on because I'm fairly technology savvy, I think, for someone of my age, but but I was thinking in an old model, like I'll build the website, I'll put it on iTunes, and I'll just keep it there because it's neat and tidy and it looks nice, and the website's fucking looks great, blah blah blah. And I can't remember who it was, but someone was like, "Nah, mate, like it's great having the website, but just get it out wherever you can."
Yeah.
People are not platform or app. You know, I mean, they are to an extent, but
Right.
the more places they can find it,
That's right.
the more likely it's gonna get heard.
Yeah,
you know,
that's exactly.
Before I move on to something else, interesting stat I heard today. Galaxy, or should I say Android, is the great untapped universe at the moment in terms of and this is more about it gives you an indication of the demographic of listener.
Right.
Apple devices are responsible, I'm reading it directly from here, responsible for about 60% of podcast downloads. So let that sink in, who the typical iPhone user is or whatever.
Well, that's me.
Right.
Yeah.
But Apple has less than a 20% share of the global smartphone market. Android has well over 80%. So what I'm basically saying to you is the majority of people are on the third most sold phone or smartphone platform.
Yeah.
So the Google podcast thing is hugely significant. That
Right.
they, especially when iTunes, iTunes have just announced they're no more.
Well,
Yeah.
they're changing it.
They're
But
changing
yeah,
it. Yeah. So to round that off, I think it's interesting because iTunes just sort of podcasting kind of happened by accident for them. They put it there, but I don't know about you guys. It's funny how little we actually know or are told from iTunes. You just sort of put it up there. And so it'll be interesting to see even backstage where things like Squarespace and stuff stop changing all their, like when I fill everything out, it's targeted to Apple,
Right.
So anyway, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Auckland, in East Auckland, southeast.
Yeah.
Bucklands Beach.
Buckland Beach?
Yep.
Yeah. And what primary school out there?
What primary school? Mellons Bay Primary School.
Mellons Bay Primary
Yeah.
School? Small school? Big school?
I don't know. I don't know how it compares to other primary schools. Seemed like a regular-sized primary school.
Yeah. And went all through high school?
Didn't quite make it.
Yep. You don't say that. It's different to saying I left early, saying I didn't quite make it. So please.
Well, you said, did you get all the way through? And I'm like, no, I didn't quite make it.
Please,
I got
expand.
I got a term into sixth form back when they were called forms.
Yeah.
And I left. It wasn't working for me, and I struggled at school for a lot of reasons, and I left
Something that would be like diagnosed now, like dyslexia, or
actually, it's bang on. I found out in recent years that I'm quite dyslexic.
Yeah.
Didn't know then. I also found out that my eyesight always was terrible.
Yeah.
My eyeballs are the wrong shape apparently.
Oh my God, same.
Really?
Stigmatism.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've got a rugby-shaped right eyeball.
Right. Yeah. That's
20/20 vision, but I wear glasses.
Right. Yeah. And so apparently I could never see, although I didn't realise.
Wow.
And I just didn't fit in the curriculum. It just wasn't. I wasn't the type of kid that was ever going to thrive in that situation. And I had a pretty rocky childhood in many ways. So I was just struggling, and school wasn't working. And I got to sixth form, which was the first year that was fully internally assessed, whereas fifth form and prior to that had been.
That's right, and they all they all shuffle for those numbers. That stupid system,
And I was just screwed at that point. I mean, I half the teachers didn't like me, and I was just Well,
you probably, if it sounds like if you're being disruptive or whatever, it's because you couldn't fucking see and you were dyslexic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I wasn't a troublemaker.
No, you don't strike me. You don't strike me that you would have been. Yeah,
I wasn't starting things, but
you're just a little confused. I'm serious, Yeah.
Well, I was. Yeah, I mean, I was. Well, part of the thing about being dyslexic is that it's not necessarily a flaw; it's just a different way of processing.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't know that until many years later.
Yeah.
It just wasn't the environment that I should have been in, really.
Yeah.
And I remember, like music, for example, I was terrible at theory, and I was fundamentally terrible at sitting exams.
Yeah.
Even even if I knew half the stuff, it would go out of my head, in that moment.
Yeah.
So I remember in fifth form music, I did really badly in the theory side of things, in the exam side of things.
But the performance side you nailed.
I got that. All the points there, so I passed easily. Sixth form, completely eternally assessed, and no practical side of music. And I thought, that's ridiculous. That's like going to...
What are they... You probably don't even remember. What are they assessing? Like reading sheet music and...
I can't remember. And I only did a term. Yeah. But I remember saying at the time, it's like going to woodwork, class and never building anything, just reading books about it. I was like, that's bullshit,
It's curious that your eyes weren't spotted, just because I had this, not the opposite, but I had... I suppose I did have the opposite, where... I've got these daggy photos of me like 3 or 4 years old with this huge pair of glasses kind of held on by elastic.
Right.
Because they picked the lazy eye, but then when I was about 9 or 10, they said you don't need to wear glasses anymore, and then I started getting crazy headaches in the middle of the night in my late 20s.
Right.
And started wearing them again. But yeah, I can't imagine it not having been picked up early on. Like, I don't know how no one could have noticed that you...
I think some kids just don't get looked at.
Right.
It's not like they were paying attention to me and missed it. They just weren't paying attention.
Right.
I mean, I had... I think it was I can't remember who she was, actually. It was a teacher at primary school. She might have been like the principal's wife or something. And she might have worked in the office. Or I can't remember who she was. But she noticed when I was about 7 or 8 that I couldn't read.
Yeah.
She just finally clicked one day, hey, this kid can't read.
Yeah.
My actual teacher hadn't noticed.
That's a good teacher.
And she gave me private tuition
what
after
they
school.
call reading recovery.
Yeah.
And
she taught me to read.
Wow.
And she really changed my life. And I think I appreciate
I love
that
those
more.
Stories.
As I appreciate it more as I...
Have you seen her in the last few decades? Or
No, never seen her since.
Yeah.
But she was just one of the few people that actually looked at me and went, hey, there's something going on here.
Yeah. And then, so it sounds like you don't leave in sixth form with like, hey, I know exactly what I'm going to do with my life now. Because I just want to tie this up with, I found it curious when I asked your age at the beginning, because you said it's very pointedly says in your bio you've been a professional, or you've been full-time for 14, 16 years. So there is a gap there. So what happened after school? And
well, I mean, I always knew that I wanted to do something in music. That was sort of a given. When I was, one of the things about me is I'm pretty good at problem solving.
Yeah.
And when I was in sixth form and things weren't working out, and I just remember thinking, I'm wasting my time. I'm not getting anything out of this. My parents have paid for me to be here, and the money's going to waste. I'm losing a year. What can I do to turn this around?
Yeah.
And so it was actually my music teacher that put me over the line, made me leave school, because she was a pretty awful person.
Yeah.
And
I had an awful music teacher too. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe it's the thing about music teachers. But I decided that maybe the best thing to do would be to get what I didn't know the term internship, but I thought maybe
it wasn't really in the vernacular then.
More of an American thing, isn't it? But I thought maybe I could get an internship in a recording studio, because then I'd be actually in the business and learning about it.
Great. So you were like, music is my occupation from early on.
I'd been performing since I was 12, and I'd made my decision about music before that. So I wrote letters to every single recording studio in the Yellow Pages, asking them if I could come and work for nothing or for free. And
York Street, Stebbings,
all of them.
All of them.
And I heard back from none of them except for one who said yes.
Yeah.
And I got a unpaid job at a little tiny studio under a radio station in town.
Awesome.
So I had to catch a bus and all this.
Yeah, good on you, man.
And I did that until they relocated. And after that, I went and got a job, and I moved out of home really young. And then the next, that gap you're talking about, was a few years of being in rock bands. And
so you got a job in a studio based on the fact you'd intern and got your chops up and got a good reference, kind of a thing.
Pretty much, yeah.
Awesome.
And I remember just sitting there.
Cheaper than a student loan.
Well, exactly. I thought, people are paying to get a course to learn how to be a sound engineer. I'll just go straight to the studio. It makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
I was terrible at it, and I also learnt through that I didn't want to be a sound engineer.
Yeah.
But in the process, I learnt a lot about recording. We made loads of jingles and various people's albums and things.
Well, having that 360 view of how a whole environment or ecosystem works is really handy. I kind of got that out of student radio, out of BNet, because there's just so little money to go around. You end up going, I'll try my hand at production, I'll try my hand at sales.
That's right.
It's like that wouldn't happen in a big corporate radio environment.
Exactly, and I think that's really important.
Yeah.
It's a really important point. And once that studio gig finished for me, I went and bounced around rubbish jobs for a number of years and hated every minute of it, and I was broke the whole time and the whole thing. The usual young person story.
What were you doing
right?
if it wasn't engineering in the studios? You mean jobs? Or just jobs, just like jobs?
Oh, no, just other jobs. I did retail.
I've made some coffee, mate. I've made some coffee in my time.
Exactly. But you mean in the studio or out of the studio?
Oh, no.
Because in the studio, I was definitely coffee,
I'm
bitch.
being confusing now. No, I was meaning, other jobs. I just realised Tomo listens a lot. My good friend is a very talented and long-term barista. I'm not deriding the coffee-making profession, but I'm saying I've done work, hospital, retail, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Get by work.
Well, I've learned so many good things from those jobs I had. Like I worked in a sheet metal factory.
Well,
for
you
example.
learn how to graft.
Yeah.
I have people in the world I work in now of academia.
Yeah.
When it's on, it's on. Like marking and stuff's the most. It's the most grueling part of the job. It only gets more grueling.
Right.
But people who say this work's really hard work, we're really hard worked. I'm like, you have not grafted.
Right.
This is, as long as you get this, it's like results based. So I don't have to be there tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning. No one will check.
Yeah.
So you learn how to graft.
And
man.
I have a very deep respect for people that work hard.
Yeah.
So when I worked in the sheet metal factory, I knew that I didn't want to stay there.
No.
But I never looked down on my colleagues.
Yeah.
I thought, man, these guys work hard.
Was it like in The Simpsons when they stop and then the disco starts and lots of sweaty man bodies?
It was exactly like that.
Oh,
I think it was
nice. Why
based
did
on
you
the
leave?
factory I worked in. It was too much fun. I couldn't get any sleep.
Right. Goodness. And you say there's a sort of. So what was it? Just chipping away that whole time, or was there? I don't know. Just because the way it's worded, it sounds like there was a concerted decision made one day or whatever, right, I'm going to make myself the player, the business now.
There kind of was. And it was the problem that I was trying to solve through those years.
Yeah.
I knew that I didn't want to... I felt like I was wasting my time for 40 hours a week because I was trying to do something with my life and this was sort of, I couldn't get into it.
Yeah.
So then the question was, how do I go full-time with music? And it seemed to be the question everybody else was asking too.
Yeah.
And very few people could figure it out. Then I met one guy I knew figured it out and he went full-time.
Right. And I like dates, so where are we roughly now?
Early 2000s.
Yeah.
So maybe with this conversation was maybe 2002 or 3 or something. And I'd known this guy for a few years because we gigged in the same places.
Yeah.
So he said one day in passing, I went full time. And I'm like, tell me everything. And he nailed it. And what he did was he set up a number of different things under the music umbrella. He basically decided he wasn't going to earn his entire living from one thing.
Yeah.
He had to get a number of things going.
Yeah.
And I just never had anyone put it that way to me before. So now he was writing and releasing original music. He was recording jingles. He had a covers band. All that stuff.
You know what I find interesting that goes hand in hand with that? I think some people tend to they have too narrower vision of kind of, how do I put it, let's go with this, what's cool and what's cheesy, and you know what I mean? So like, some people might go, I'm not writing jingles, I'm a serious musician, and where I considered that perspective was, my uncle's talked about it in the past because he was a working musician for decades in Wellington and in Melbourne.
Right.
And then when he moved to Melbourne, he answered an ad in what was probably then the Trading Post or whatever to fix what was called singing machines.
Right.
Effectively, before Japan rebranded them as karaoke.
Right.
And so for the last few decades, he got on really well with the guy. It almost became like a father figure. Kind of fell into the guy's business and my uncle became the karaoke guy in Melbourne. Now, a lot of people in the music scene would think, oh, that's super cheesy and uncool, but it's been his bread and butter.
Exactly.
It's paid the mortgage.
Exactly.
There's an amazing recording studio at the back and stuff, and it was him that said to me, like, you don't have to be too cool all the time.
Well, I always
you can
say,
do cool stuff and do stuff because you want to invoice in the industry that you love.
I always say I always say that ideals are for the unemployed.
Yeah.
And I went back to my band at the time and said, I think we should start doing this other stuff. And most of them told me to get fucked. A couple of them stuck with me, and I had to replace a few guys, and there was quite a bit of upheaval at that time. But my attitude was that when you get started, and I think this relates to just business in any industry, but when you get started, you just have to get the thing off the ground.
Yeah.
You have to get to break even first. You have to do whatever you have to do to get to that point. When you get choosy is later.
Yeah.
You know, that's when you've built the business up and you're solid enough.
Well, you've recorded albums that are your work since then. You've
That's
done
right.
all of that.
Well,
Yeah.
it enabled me to do that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been
No,
able
I
to
get
do
it.
that.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So I think that people just have a reversed. They've got it back to front.
And so was it just in that early period when you were told that it's it's not pre-internet at all, but was it just door knocking, emailing? Like once you were like, I sort of see it like I'm increasing my portfolio, whatever that means. Was it just like knocking, same thing you'd done earlier on with getting the recording studio internship, just going, hey, I'm here, I can do stuff.
Hustling, yeah. When I look back now and I can't quite believe what I did, to be honest with you.
And I suppose home recording equipment was becoming a bit more sort of accessible in terms of
it was,
not just being a tape-based 4-track.
But
so
I was shit at it. I had no idea. Back then I had this horrible little thing it was a digital thing, but it was worse than those old Tascam cassette things we always used to use. No, I was definitely behind the game on that side of things. Took me
so
a few
what
years.
were you doing in those first few years that changed everything?
I was getting gigs. I was booking. I set myself up as a booking agent before everyone else did, and
for overseas acts.
No, for New Zealand acts, like booking covers bands and booking street performers and things like that.
Gotcha. So you take a little cream off the top and you get them an itinerary of places to play.
No, I was actually focused on the clients. So I was going to event managers and wedding planners and corporate clients and so on, and saying, I can give you the entertainment you need for your events.
Yeah.
And then because I already knew so many musicians and other people.
Good on you. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah. And then the band gets a gig and you get a little booking fee and everyone's happy.
That's right. And I did that for 4 or 5 years until I didn't want to do it anymore.
Promoting's just a sort of another level of that. So I've almost thought of it as a form of gambling in a lot of ways.
It is.
Have you got been in the promoting game at all?
I haven't, and I don't have the desire.
Are you a
to.
risk-averse personality?
No, I'm not risk-averse at all. I wouldn't be a musician.
It rained. It rained that night. I lost all my money.
No,
There's a joke about that in Wellington. You put a show on at the Union Hall, which is, I don't know how well you know Wellington, but it's a trek up the hill to the uni. You get a cold night and rain. It's like, just stayed home and had some beers, Promoters up there, like 3 people in the room.
Well, I worked with a lot of promoters. I worked with one particular promoter a lot, and I remember him explaining the business model to me, that he loses money on 9 out of 10 gigs, and he goes, you've got to have the capital.
See, that is casino table. That is casino table life play,
It really is, yeah. And he makes a lot of money when he gets it right.
A lot
the rest
of money.
The time he's losing.
Yeah.
You have to go into that kind of business with money.
I always found it, is it Campbell Smith, the Big Day Out guy? Is it Campbell? Campbell something, isn't it?
I don't remember if he's behind Big Day.
I always just thought, what a huge operation and what a huge, it was really sad to see it. Don't know if you saw that footage of the last one at Mount Smart, but it was almost like, I think they opened it up. Basically, if you brought some old memorabilia at the end of the day, they'd let you in for free. That's how underattended it was.
Oh, wow.
At the end, it's just an interesting, kind of case study of that whole racket.
Yeah, a lot of changes.
And you eventually get to recording an album. When was the first album?
2007.
2007?
Yep. Awake and Restless.
Yourself as, under your name or as a band?
I was under my name, and at the time I attached the word band on the end of my name, which I now regret, but that's what we did. Yeah, we had been a band prior to that, and when all that upheaval happened, I had gotten tired of band culture. A lot of problems in bands unless they're set up properly. Funnily enough, now I would know how to set a band up properly.
Tired of band culture? What does that mean?
Well, tired of musicians are not great at setting up business structures.
Yeah.
So bands often say, we don't have a leader, we're a democracy. And I always say, well, democracies have leaders. That's why we've got a prime minister, There's usually someone who's putting in more effort than someone else, and those dynamics aren't resolved very easily a lot of the time. And then when it comes to recording an album or an EP or anything like that, who's going to front the money? And you've got one guy who's really committed, but the others don't have the money or whatever. And all of those problems went away as soon as I just made it my thing.
Right.
And I had the same guys. It was better for them because I paid them to come to the studio.
I was going to say, so you're employing them.
Yeah. I basically put them on contract. I still gave them artistic input. So they actually got a really good deal out of it, and I got to make it make sense on a business level, and I invested I think I spent 21 grand of my own money on that first album, and I broke even on that album after 10 months.
Wow.
And I was able to do that.
This is back when albums were selling, eh?
Well, yeah, but I actually didn't make the
So
money.
are you gonna-
I didn't make the money from selling albums.
Right.
I made the money
Touring.
from, I mean, I did sell albums, but I made the money actually from licensing and syncing and that sort of thing.
Right, so you figured out how to license as well. You weren't having someone else doing that for you.
Well, I was just taking pot shots.
Well, how do you do that? It's just fascinating. So this is all you just approach TV producers.
Pretty
and-
much, yeah. I made quite a bit of money out of Shortland St and Air New
Good on
Zealand.
you.
Air New Zealand,
Yeah.
were great, and yeah.
Well, the Knocked Up story, right?
No.
Savage, got the Savage getting that record on Knocked Up,
Right.
Getting that tune on Knocked Up.
I don't remember what Knocked Up is.
Knocked Up is a early Judd Apatow film.
Oh, is it?
It's a great comedy. It's about a guy. What's about someone who gets knocked up and
Is it?
pregnant.
That's a
But
surprise.
I think Savage got Swing or something like that on that soundtrack, and then it just went nuts on iTunes back in the $1 an iTunes song
Right.
days. But that's how Savage is. It's not just that; it's a whole lot of graft and work following that.
Yeah.
But that's how Savage got into the US market.
Well, Bobby was saying that's a similar story to what blew up for Op Shop. They had their song on Outrageous Fortune, and so he said people knew the song but didn't know who the band was.
Yeah.
And then they played on Christmas in the Park, and
Yeah.
people made the connection, and that was it.
Yeah, we forget because we're like music's a massive focus in our lives.
Yeah.
But that's how a lot of people find music. They go, I like that song on that record or that. I mean, on that
Soundtrack
movie or
or
that
something.
TV
Yeah.
show, or whatever.
Yeah.
So you were playing. So your dulcet tones were playing in the background of the cafe in Shortland Street or whatever.
Yeah, I actually.
Did you even know what? How would you know what to charge? Do you ask around to other people?
It's all set up. That we don't negotiate that. We just get told. We get paid a certain amount per minute.
Sorry, I cut you off there. You're saying I actually.
Oh no, I had a great moment. I didn't get to see it. I've since tried to look it up and couldn't for the life of me figure out how to find it. But there was apparently an episode of Shortland Street that had been the story had been building up where these two teenagers had decided they were first going to sleep together. They're going to lose their virginity together.
Oh,
right?
you were the cherry popping music.
I was, yeah. And apparently it built up over episodes. They get to the moment and the guy goes, "I'll put some music on, set the mood," and he puts on one of my songs. And I was told about that a couple of weeks later. I was like, "Yes,
you got to,
that's fantastic."
you got to find that. It's got to be somewhere. I know that back in the day. Tape used to be so expensive that a whole lot of TV, not just in New Zealand, but a number of places, is just gone because they go over stuff. But I think Shortland Street is new enough that they would be archiving.
But if you're me and you go online and you go and you're searching for Shortland Street virgins, you don't get any sense.
Turn that safe search on. I've lost my train of thought now. But it will be somewhere, even maybe, sniff around TV. I mean, you've struck me as quite resourceful so far if you can't find a Shortland Street.
Well, that sounds like a challenge.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It was a direct challenge.
It is.
This is becoming abrasive.
Yeah, it is. And then you're going to tell me that Elite Music then was your label?
No, Elite Music was a distributor based in Nelson.
Right.
And unfortunately, they got knocked out by the recession a couple of years later. But at the time, they were really, really great, and they were hugely supportive. So,
well, this is where it's interesting, because your next album, Say What You Mean, in 2009, I see the Universal distribution or support, or however you're involved with them. This, I looked at this today and I thought, shivers, that's just when the arse started really falling out of sales, isn't it?
yes, I timed it perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's talk a little bit about that, because I've heard you guys talk about, I know it's a topic you cover a lot on your podcast, but from someone who's been a working musician for years, goodness, this is so broad, like what have you seen change-wise? How do you feel about the changes that have happened, and how have you adapted? I think that's good.
I think that's a really good question. I think with the first record, we had all the same hopes and dreams as everybody else.
Yeah.
When we actually signed a record deal with a company called Liberation, and they distributed through Universal.
They're Australian, aren't they?
They
Liberation?
are, but they have a New Zealand, or at least they did have a New Zealand league. I don't know if they do now. So that was all very exciting. We expected great things, and it was a bit of an anticlimax in the end. We didn't get the results we were looking for.
It's global timing. It's nothing anyone did wrong, right? It's what I'm talking about.
It was the industry, the music industry, and the recession all happening at once.
Yeah.
And I think there were some bad decisions made. I think they chose the wrong single, for example.
Yeah.
And we it's one of those moments where you think, if I could go back now, I'll do it better.
So you sort of felt, is it sounding like, because you were with a bigger organisation, I don't know if intimidated is too stronger a word, but you felt you sort of didn't speak up because it's like, I'm dealing with freaking Universal and Liberation.
I did speak up,
right,
but I didn't get heard.
Yeah.
which is often the way with those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And the thing about a record deal also is that you really have to be top bill. You have to be top priority.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just fall down the list.
Yeah.
And we weren't top priority, So the thing I think that surprised me the most about that experience was that on the first album I had been able to really go out and work my ass off to generate money and to promote the album and all the rest of it. But because we were now signed with the second album, I wasn't actually allowed to do anything.
Yeah.
Because it had to go through them.
You sound like someone who does best when you're in control of what's going on, man.
Well, it's not, but it's not a control issue.
Yeah.
It's just that they weren't being proactive.
Yeah.
I'm instinctively proactive,
Yeah.
and I got frustrated because I was like, just let
so
me
you
do
weren't
it.
in control.
Well, yeah, but I would have been happy to hand over the control if they were proactive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel I should lie on the couch now. Let's talk about control, okay? So was it also one of those scenarios where they are basically lending you a whole lot of money that you have to pay back at the same time? For your
No, it wasn't.
Okay, so you went wined and dined.
No.
Right.
No.
So we did get so to the wider industry. Like, I mean, I heard it's weird. I sort of like seems like a Tom Larkin fanboy just because I've listened to two really. I've always found him and John really fascinating when they speak about anything, and he's very insightful about the industry, as I say, because he manages. He runs a recording studio. Obviously, he's a long-term singer and player. He's a producer.
Yep.
And I listened to I'll send you the link later on, a great music-focused podcast coming out of Australia.
Yeah.
He was a guest on.
Cool.
And I'm not going to bast it. I'm not going to get this right, and I want to go back and watch it again. But Tom was basically saying that he thinks the industry is in the healthiest state it's been in ages as of recently, and he thinks that things are on the up. And he thinks that also, relating to what you said about what the labels did with you, he said, sort of like with Napster, when Sean, whatever his name is, said, "Hey, can we work with you? I don't actually want to be ripping you off."
Yeah.
He thinks that the industry just didn't react well or have contingency plans in place for ages,
Yes.
and streaming and Spotify kind of saved them, right? What was my point in relation to what I was going to ask you? Where are you at now? Because with your perspective on that, are things like streaming an evil, or are things coming right now?
I think streaming has been unbelievably destructive in our industry, and
Right.
I'm not going to throw it a bone any day of the week.
Yeah, good, man.
But I think, and I was really disheartened. But when my third album came out, it was about the same time Spotify came to New Zealand, and I saw immediately what was about to happen, and that put me off big time. Like that hit me hard. But I think he's right about the industry being healthy.
Yeah.
It depends it depends what you focus on. If you're talking about financially healthy, not really.
Yeah.
But creatively, it's really healthy.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've learned about through the podcast, circling back to your other question about what have I learned?
That's called a callback in stand-up comedy, folks. He just did a callback.
There you go.
Yeah.
Is that you? Now I've lost my.
Sorry. Shut up, Lewis. Healthy industry.
What I was going to say
was
that there's a lot of conversation these days about how great things were and how shit things are now.
Yeah.
And what we're learning over and over again, talking to artists who have been around for a long time, things weren't that great.
No.
I remember actually being on tour with Tom Emmanuel, and he the one day he goes, "I just received my first paycheck from an album I released in the 80s.
Wow.
And I was like, "Fuck off, that's not real."
Really?
And he goes, "Yep, it just took that long. They're useless." So
wow.
I think
or they're useless, or they're doing that classic thing businesses do where you just hold off as long as you can so you've got the money in your account.
Yeah, exactly. And every other story actually that goes with it.
Yeah.
But, we have independence now, and the bets are off in a way. I mean, you don't necessarily need to write your 3-minute 30 hit.
Yeah.
Write your 25-minute prog song if you want, because you're going to get just as many plays as everybody else. So creatively, we're sort of off the hook, which is great. It's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, as I say, I mean, we only sort of know intimately our generations, the generations sort of come after us, and then maybe up to our grandparents. Like, what a lot of people don't realise, it comes back to me talking about patronage being an old model and stuff, is that really industrialised music industry, historically, the history of humans making sound, is something that was only a few decades old before it crashed and burned.
That's right. Yep.
Even before the 1950s, the music industry looked radically different.
That's exactly
that kind of almost mafioso style of controlling musicians. Hey, right? It's a 50-year thing.
It's funny because the industry grew with technology, and then technology killed it. So it's this funny little circle. But what I was going to say in the end, though, was that to be successful now, we have to be smart.
Yeah.
And I think that musicians often and obviously it's not everyone,
Yeah.
but musicians often think that the record deal or the management deal or whatever is the thing that's going to break them through to this sort of utopian existence where they don't have to do anything.
No, I get exactly what you're saying.
And the money lands on the limos, land on the
And it's a naivety, man.
Yeah, it's
and
like
also
a holy grail thing.
It's also, you know, kind of blowing smoke up your ass. It's like you set yourself up, even though you didn't know this was going to happen 14, 16 years ago, whatever it is you say in your bio, your method of working and your approach kind of set you up to be fairly in control compared to maybe others when all of this went down.
Entirely on accident. I'd love to say it was on purpose. But I think that's what it comes down to. Even if you make a lot of money or you get a lot of fans or whatever, you still have to run your business, you know?
It's funny because I follow well, actually I don't follow him because I thought I'm going to have one too many drinks one night and I'm going to end up making a not very nice comment about this guy's music career. There's a guy. So there's basically a guy.
I have no idea where you're going right now.
There's a guy in the hip hop scene in New Zealand who posts a bunch of stuff about, you know, his career and his world advancing, and he is just kind of so naive to a whole lot of stuff that the others of us can see. And this is sort of tangentially related. It's sort of like the way I see his approach is like, because it's you talking about the limousines and blah blah blah. His, I think his knowledge of the industry is growing up watching like American pop videos, man.
Pretty much,
you know. And I think reading between the lines, I think he's lucky enough to be supported with a wealthy family. So there's also that kind of layer of not having to sort of deal with some of the realities, you know. You're smiling at me. You know the cultural meme I'm talking about, eh? But whatever style of music it is.
But that's broader than music. I mean, there are some people who have an ignorant/arrogant view on the world, and they're constantly reinforced. So they never find out that they're wrong, you know. And there are some people who hit the ground a few times in their life, and they get a bit of character, you know.
So because another guy I know produced a lot of music in the early 2000s, and it was tied up because it's electronic music. It's tied up in a bunch of different small labels globally, basically.
Right.
And all of his stuff's on Spotify now, whether he likes it or not, because of old contracts. So is that what happened with your albums? They've just ended up there?
No. I was able to sign the right deals in that sense. So I now fully own everything.
But how did you know beforehand? Before all of this?
I didn't know the future, but I just made sure the deal.
But like the podcasts, coming back to what we're talking about with getting our podcasts out there, why wouldn't you want your stuff up there these days? Well,
yeah, that's right. But I think something that I've always thought with any kind of contract is I've just thought, well, just read it. Just think about it. Just think about the pros and cons and how does this work for you? I think that a lot of musicians automatically sign a record deal if it's put in front of them because they're told their whole lives they're supposed to, you know.
Well, also it's the holy grail. You say, I've made it. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you actually just think, is this the right deal for me?
Wait, hang on, stop. Is your music on Spotify or is it not on Spotify?
It is on Spotify.
It is on Spotify. Okay.
Yeah. But it wasn't for a long time, and then I decided to put it there.
You come round to it.
Yeah.
And in New Zealand, how many New Zealand artists do you think would get a would get a facsimile? How many New Zealand artists would get an amount of money that is actually realistically worth their while being on Spotify? Because we've talked, it's exposure, it's having other things that you do, it's gigging. I know all of that. I know the narrative. I've heard it a lot of times. But I'm interested, just on a financial level, would it be like kind of the Finn brothers and a few other people? Or I would
love to know the answer to that too. I think we're talking about the cream, you know, who
I think
significant money.
Because I think even APRA payments really only are in, you know, money territory with the sort of names I'm mentioning, right?
Well, I've got friends who are in bands that are doing really well.
You want to be on the whole. You want to be on the whole music for a government department. I reckon. I reckon Ticky's always on my mind, and part of the Freddy's album and a couple of those Dobbo classics. I reckon just being on hold to IRD has to be good APRA.
Yeah,
money,
I'm sure that adds up. Yeah, and they only play 5 songs. Those cool waiting things.
They've got that. You know that Nature compilation that came out.
Yep.
That's what a lot of them have got, man.
From 2001 or whenever that was.
Yeah. I cut you off. Do you remember what you were saying? Some of your friends...
Oh, yeah, I've got some friends who are in bands who have done really great things in lots of ways, as in loads and loads of Spotify plays in the millions. Yeah. And other things as well. And, you know, they got all excited about their payment coming through. And I said to them, maybe you should just wait to count your chickens.
Yeah.
And they're like, no. And they're all super excited. And then they got the payment and they're like, nah. They're bummed out for
Nothing
ages.
on the left side of the decimal point.
No. I mean, I think they made a few $100 or something.
Yeah.
But I mean, by the time they got millions and millions of plays, and it just doesn't convert into real money. And especially then when you've got management and other people taking things out,
So I want to talk to you in a bit about some of these big artists you've played with, but just rounding off this kind of like business, and modern musician in a capitalist environment that we live in, conversation. What will you do? Is the album released, or is it released shortly? The one you sent me the Spotify link for. Is the release coming, or
it's coming? It's coming in about 3 months, 2 or 3 months.
So what will you do around that in 2019? Will you go out and tour? Will you try and get it licensed? Will you?
All of the above. All of the above.
Yep.
I'm trying to get it licensed and synced. I'm planning on playing some shows. I'm releasing music videos and doing the social media side of things. I'm doing things like this,
Making a video is a lot cheaper these days, right? More accessible.
Depending on how you do it. Yeah, sure. Yep.
Who comes to a Danny McCrum show? Who's your audience?
Well, I haven't done one for ages, so I don't know.
Who was it last time?
I actually stepped out of the game for a while after the third album. So I went and focused more on being a session musician and have toured for the last several years with loads of other people. And so I'm actually relearning my songs at the moment and putting a show together. So it's going to be
Danny,
interesting to see.
when I listened to the single today and I flicked through some of the rest of the album, it's good to see track 3 as the single. I always used to say when I talked to Mikey Havoc about it a couple of times, he'd always say track 3 or track 4. If you're gonna test an album, you just go there straight away. There's always gold on track 3 or track 4. But anyway,
is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah, after track 3 or track, if it's not happening by track 3 or track 4, you don't put the bangers at the end. But what was I going to ask you about that? I was the look of the vid and stuff, and this really worked. This is certainly not at all a criticism. The look of the vid, and I thought it was going to be a different style of music to it's almost kind of like there was almost kind of Jamiroquai.
Don't be talking crazy. There's no way I'm leaving. This place is paradise. So come on.
Kind of a feel there in parts.
That's cool.
It's really I love this is where my technical knowledge for terms is. It's like very organic sounding. It's not overly layered in effects and so on.
That's
and I thought it's quite radio friendly. Do you think radio is somewhere you like? Does radio matter these days? Would you try and get a tune on the radio?
I'll definitely try. Yeah. I don't know much about the radio industry these days. I don't know whether its significance is the same as 10 years ago. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess it's not, but that's just because I assume everything's changed. But I'm definitely going to try. It's funny, though, because I don't see myself as a radio artist.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of songs
I had kid gloves with that because sometimes you say that to people, but you've just said to me you're really open-minded, over the course of this podcast. Some people would hear that, some musicians would hear that as, oh, you're cheesy? Not at all. You're not at all. Some music just suits radio, some doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, I like strong melodies, so I think a lot of my music's quite catchy, and I like good grooves and tight arrangements, so I think I sort of accidentally end up writing songs that could work that way. It's funny, I had a meeting with someone a couple of weeks ago who said that song could really be on the radio.
No, it could. Yeah, totally.
It'd be interesting to see if radio agrees.
I thought so. It even had like, it was interesting. It had like a 4/4. Like, actually, what did I write down? I wrote down, it looked like it was going to be all Black Crows, and then it went Jamiroquai.
It's an interesting turnaround. I don't get the Black Crows reference, but I don't mind it. I don't mind it.
The stylised video. And where did you film that? I thought it was LA at first, but it's Auckland, isn't it?
No, it's both.
Okay,
Yep.
So what's the connection to LA? Because I think this is where we move into talking about, I'm guessing that you've sessioned with a lot of these big musicians you've worked with, or is it touring and studio work?
No, the majority of them have been touring and support slots. Yeah.
Oh, your band supporting?
Yep.
How did you get those links? That's incredible, man.
Some of it was referrals. Some of it was us just asking and applying and begging. And
supports in New Zealand or overseas as well?
Yeah, mostly in New Zealand.
So who have you supported?
Well, supported in the early days. I think the first bigger ones were Jimmy Barnes and,
Wow.
and John Mayer.
That'd be a huge crowd in New Zealand. Would that be one of the biggest crowds you'd played at the time?
I actually can't even remember how big that crowd was. I don't think it would have been the biggest I've played to.
Yeah.
It might have been. I'd be completely guessing. I can't even remember what the crowd looked like that night. But it was out. It was at the V8 Supercars.
Wow.
And Tadpole.
Now that's
Tadpole
Jimmy
playing
Barnes,
too.
man.
Yeah. At the Pukekohe something stadium, whatever that's called.
I didn't. There's a lot of like mainstream artists that basically when I've got older, because my teens and 20s were about trying to find lots of stuff off the beaten path, and
Right.
I've really started to appreciate. Like I watched the Exponents doco.
Yeah.
When I was at uni, like the Exponents were what like the like moleskin wearing commerce students listen to, but I'm like, what a fucking great band
They are. Yeah.
And I had the same thing. I saw a Jimmy Barnes doco in Australia, and I was like, that guy's got one of the greatest rock voices of all time, man.
Absolutely.
You know?
The one of the lasting memories I have from that day
Yeah.
is Jimmy walking up on stage. Firstly, he walked over to us and said, "Hi, I'm Jimmy Barnes."
Well, that's a good
and
start,
I
right?
almost went, "Yeah, I know." You know?
Yeah.
But I always thought, how nice was he? But he walked up on stage and he just goes, "Wow!" and sang this really big note,
Yeah.
and then stopped and he coughed for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And then he goes, "Okay, I'm ready."
Before the audience got there, like sound check.
Sound check, yeah.
Didn't he? Now I'm trying to remember. Didn't he have a whole lot of? He actually nearly. There was a rough period there with the voice and stuff, to do with
Yes.
drinking and so on,
Absolutely,
isn't there?
yeah.
He's kind of got his shit back together, or like he's got his life back together.
It might have even been before that. I can't remember the timing.
Interesting life, man.
Yeah.
And so a name that stuck out to me because it's like from my mother's record collection, and I really like this artist is what's the connection to Joan Armatrading?
Oh, we ended up supporting a double bill. She was.
Do you like her music?
I love her music.
The music's amazing.
Yeah, she's fantastic, and I was already into her music, so that was
yeah.
just a happy accident.
Probably like me through an uncle or a
Actually, it was a
mother
producer.
or
It was the
right,
producer
okay.
on the first album.
Yeah.
He was just in the downtime. He was saying, "You should check out Joan
She's
Armatrading."
great. Yeah.
Yeah, and funnily enough, is that later the same year we got the support slot.
Yeah.
But she did a double bill with Brian Ferry, and so we did a duo performance for that one, myself and another friend of mine who plays guitar.
Yeah.
And Joan was fantastic. Like
Yeah.
she is better live than she is on record.
Yeah, right.
You know? Yeah.
Wow.
So that was cool.
Session stuff. Have you saying you session with some artists as well?
Yeah, just bits and pieces here
Right.
and there. Yeah.
So support for Eric Clapton then. This is just a big name drop now. I mean, Eric
Yep.
Clapton's Jeff Beck. They're not to be snubbed at. They support slots over here, were they?
Yep, and the Clapton one came about because of the Jeff Beck one. So
Yeah.
the Jeff Beck one came up, and then we were at the Jeff Beck show when they asked us if we'd be interested in doing the Clapton one, which is still one of the funniest questions I've ever been asked. As if we can go, nah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was a pretty surreal
I
moment.
haven't liked him since Tears from Heaven. Bugger that.
Well, it's funny because I grew up with a friend of mine called Ben, who I grew up with. We both started playing guitar at the same time, and we're still good friends now.
Yeah.
And we were 11 and 12 learning Eric Clapton songs,
Yeah.
And he was in my band
Yeah.
for about 3 years. He was
Yeah.
in my band, and that crossed over that
Yeah.
gig. So
I
there
did
was
the
this
same.
weird-
You learn Eric Clapton, you learn Led Zeppelin, you
Yep.
learn Pink Floyd.
Yep.
Yeah,
There's a certain
absolutely.
sort of a list. At the
Yeah.
time, there was also like more than
And
words.
some of them are, early on, it's a buzz to like be able to play some of their, simpler compositions.
Yeah.
Then, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was a really nice moment to
I get it.
have that
Went full
memory and
circle.
then end
Crazy.
up backstage with them, It was-
I mean that is the support artist story a lot,
Yeah.
right? Is just that. And so you got someone like Jimmy who's like, it sounds like, they do say being a nice guy is a good secret to succeeding in a lot of industries and things in life.
Mm-hmm.
I'd imagine others are just by virtue of some of them might have been at the literal arse end in New Zealand at the end of a really long tour.
Probably, yeah.
I'm sure some of them you don't even hear cooey from them, right?
No, I didn't have much of a conversation with Brian Ferry. He was pretty quiet.
Yeah,
and
that's another.
You don't know how to read these things. I mean, he
Yeah.
might have just been in his head.
Was he touring as Brian Ferry or as Roxy Music?
No, just Brian Ferry.
Right.
Yeah, as Brian Ferry.
Yeah. Was that a good show? I don't know a
Yeah.
lot about him. I know he's really highly regarded, but
I'm
that's
the same
kind of,
as you.
That's kind of passing
No,
me by.
I know he's highly
Yeah.
regarded, and I don't know much about him.
Yeah.
And so he's one of those artists that sort of missed me for some reason.
Yeah, but you supported him nonetheless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was good. It's great.
Yeah. And what do? You're saying you've taken a hiatus from sort of playing, well, obviously recorded an album, but touring and so on. You're doing the podcast. We've talked about how that's for love.
I haven't taken a hiatus from touring. I took a hiatus from
I was basically all I was going to ask is how you're making a living these days.
Oh, right. Well, I've finished the first thing, which is that...
Aside from that bag of weed you sold me when you first got here.
Well, I got to the point where the day-to-day struggle of pushing your original music and trying to get it out there, that whole grind, which I'd felt like I'd been on that since I was a kid, you know?
Yeah.
And then the Spotify thing happened and a number of other things happened, and I just needed to step out. And I actually almost quit music altogether. I just had this moment where I thought, maybe this is me. And then I thought about it for a couple of months, and I thought, actually, I don't need to do that. I just need to change what I'm focusing on. And the whole time through...
Reinvent, reflect.
Well, the entire time, I'd always been playing for other people.
Yeah.
And I'd always just seen it as sort of nothing. It's just this other thing I did. But I thought, what if I just make that my focus for a while?
Yeah.
And so I just focused on that and gave myself a break from writing songs and go into the grind. And
I don't think you can do creativity full time for 40 years. That's not an uncommon story.
No,
right?
exactly. Yeah. And the great thing was, I had no idea if it'd ever come back, and I didn't mind if it didn't.
Yeah.
And the great thing was, it came back. You know, a few years later, I suddenly thought, I know what I want to do.
Do you subscribe to there's some people who are like creatives and other people that sort of aren't so much creatives, or do you think that creativity is kind of universal?
I think creativity is definitely universal. I think it's in everybody, but I don't think everybody finds that out about themselves. I think you have to open the door or take the pill or whatever. You know, if you get a taste of it, and then you realise what's possible.
Well, I also think that someone who's a brilliant engineer or builds a custom car. It's the next question becomes, what is creativity? You know, and it's actually one of the great in the English language. Excuse me, and I didn't realise this till I tried to. Once you start attacking things academically, people, you've got to be precise,
right?
And my supervisor was like, it's one of the great contested words.
Yes,
is what is creativity?
Yeah, I've never thought to break it down.
Well, you know what I mean. Like, I think that creativity, man. I think we think of creativity as the arts, but I think creativity. I think a great chef is really creative.
I totally agree.
Yeah,
I think creativity is something to do with problem solving. It's something to do with imagining an outcome and working towards it. I talked before about how I struggled at school.
Yeah.
And if I went back in time and spoke to my younger self and said, you're going to set up a business and actually run a business, I would have said, I can't do that.
Can't do the books, I can't see.
But I actually grew to love the process.
Yeah.
And the reason why I love the process is because I see it as creative. It's the same as making a record.
Yeah.
And you start off with an idea about how you want it to work, and then you step by step build up to that idea.
Yeah.
So I think creativity is far broader than most people realize.
Actually, it's funny, the cooking connection. Like, it's just, I could be completely making this up. Maybe a whole bunch of people who are all, used to be lacrosse players get really into cooking later on. But I've noticed a lot of my musician friends, musically inclined friends, we're all getting really into cooking in a big way later in life.
Interesting.
People like sort of sharing artisan sausage recipes, and it's like the hunt for the recipe and the prep and it's all construction and what goes well together, and
I think that's great. And I haven't noticed that pattern, but I'm sure you're right.
Yeah.
But I think that creative people, it certainly doesn't end at their instrument.
No.
I think you find that we draw or we cook or whatever. We all do, because creativity is more of a motor skill. I think. You can't really.
No, it's been interesting because it's like the Tom Larkin by association podcast, because he really subscribes to that. Because as I say, I watched this quite. I found it posed a lot of questions, and he had a lot of really interesting insight when I listened to it the other night. And he's very much like, of the creative people are from Venus, other people are from Mars. Camping, I guess there's no right or wrong. That's why I was asking your perspective on it. But I tend to be more with you on that. So just wrapping up, and by the way, this is going to be one of the few eps I just kind of throw up, not having to think about listening back to it, just in case anything needs to. I think we've bantered well.
Yes.
Must be something about two podcast hosts. Yeah.
Well, we both know to not leave too much silence. That's a good thing, I think.
Yeah.
We should leave some now.
Fear of dead air. When I started teaching, I realised that because I was from a broadcast background, that I did have a fear of dead air, and I've learnt to let a room breathe more when I ask a question.
Right.
I would tend to like answer my own question too quickly, and I get a lot more out of students now that I can leave that pause and let it like linger in the room.
Yeah.
And someone who doesn't normally talk will pipe up if you just once you realise it's not an uncomfortable pause.
I've got a name for that.
Right.
I call it Louis throwing someone.
Why?
Because
does Louis Theroux do big, like, long pauses?
He does.
Oh,
You watch
he does?
it. It gets to the point where it's obviously his turn to say something. He just stands there and stares at them. And a moment passes,
He does.
and they just go, confess.
I
You know?
can picture it too, and it's part of he's clever. It's that whole fish out of water. He would never have succeeded if he was an American in an American environment.
No.
I always feel like Louis Theroux's like watching a live Where's Wally? Like, you know, he's kind of like what. What do you think? Have you seen his newer shows? They've got a little bit too dark for me. Like the last few.
What are the new ones?
Oh, there was one on.
I'm a huge fan of him, by the way.
So
I'm gonna love
am
all
I.
of it.
But you must have. Then, if you're a huge fan, you would have seen them. I say latest. They might be a couple of years old. I think one was on euthanasia, but they're just not as kind of. They don't have that kind of irreverent fun they used to have. They're getting too serious for me. So you're a huge fan. Will you go and see him in Auckland?
Is he coming?
Absolutely.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
but I
that's
definitely
the thing
will.
These days, you don't go into a cafe and see flyers or anything, do you?
Never hear about anything.
Yeah, he is.
Brilliant. I have to look that
now,
up for sure.
why have I seen that? How have I been seeing that?
Maybe you made it up.
No, he's definitely coming. He's
Right.
it must have been turning up on my Facebook feed. We find out everything these days.
Yeah.
You a film guy? Will you go to stuff in the film festival?
I love films. I never have time to do anything that's
Just
not work.
pick one good music doco each year in the film festival and go to that, man. I think there's one on Aretha Franklin this time round. I can't remember. I was going to ask you about the connection to LA with the pedals and stuff, but I think we're at a nice point just to finish, man. An hour and 15 minutes.
Well, I should throw in the Chris Campbell Guitar Custom Shop and rockbox.com.
But also you should throw in where to find what's happening coming up with the album and sort of where people can find your music to listen to it.
Yes,
they're
for
going to
sure.
want to know what you play after.
Well, DannyMcCrum.com is my website,
and
I've released a single called Hustle Bustle, which is the title track, and that came out a month or so ago. The video is on my website and YouTube, and we're going to be on. I don't know when this episode's coming out, but probably by the time it's up, it'll be on Spotify as well.
I've got back I put one up a day or two ago, so I reckon I'll leave it just under 2 weeks. So basically, it'll be up. Yeah, in about 12 days.
Right, so by then, it'll be all over the streaming platforms.
Okay.
Got a new single coming out called Don't Be Late, which will be at the beginning of August, and then the album will be out at this stage. We're playing on the end of September.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice one.